Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers, because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button, and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and working on a product to help people overcome these problems, because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you. Intelligent Threads, the most advanced wearable technology on the market. This revolutionary product releases engaged muscles holding your body out of structural balance. The results are legendary, improving posture, sleep, and relaxation while decreasing pain. Go to intelligentthreads.com today for more info.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Dr. Inbal Ben Ami Bartal, part of the School of Psychological Sciences at Tel-Aviv University in Israel. And we're going to talk about what's called pro-social behavior and the neurological basis of it. So thank you for coming. Inbal, how are you doing?
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here with you and all the listeners today.
Well, good. And thank you for being here late in the evening. Just so you know, it's like late night for Inbal, but she still came. So we appreciate that. Tell me a bit about your background and then what led you to this area of study.
Right. So I am what you would call a psychobiologist, or I have a background in psychology. I also have a background as a neuroscientist. So I try to combine these different perspectives to gain insight on what leads to complex types of behaviors that we see in humans. But I ended up actually, funnily enough, focusing most of my research not on humans, but rather on a different mammal, our friend, the rat. I really was interested in along my career and have been working on this for the past over a decade or 15 years, is to really try to understand what happens when we see someone in distress, in pain or fear or some kind of need, and what happens in our brains more specifically from the moment that we see that person in distress to that point where we might decide to actually approach and help that individual. And I started that path looking at humans, but I found that humans are really complicated, and the way that we think about phenomena such as empathy or compassion or pro-social behavior, which is acting for the benefit of someone else, it becomes really complex when you think about it in human terms. There are a lot of factors that drive these type of decisions. And so I found myself drawing back on my previous experience as a researcher in neuroimmunology and thinking about the way that we can simplify the way that we do this kind of research and turn to a mammal that is very, very social. And actually, I found out later on that is really motivated when it observes other individuals' conspecifics in distress to actually approach and help those individuals. And that was kind of the basic premise of my whole program of research. So I have my lab now at Tel Aviv University, and that's in Israel. So, as you well know, it's a region that's quite fraught with intergroup conflict and problems with empathy for out-group members compared to in-group members. So that was, as far as my interest and my background, that was why I was so drawn to this very question But I really do think that it is, pandemic in our global environment today. And the question of polarization and the way that we interact with different groups is a problem across the world. So I'm very interested in it, both from the basic science sort of point of view of trying to understand how these kind of processes are brought about by our physiology, our biological systems, and both in the more psychological or cultural term.
Well, quick question here. What do you hope would be a good outcome of your research? Once you get far enough along, whatever that means, what do you hope to impact with it?
I think every scientist like me wants to have major impact on the way that on the welfare of humanity. That's the global goal, whether you're researching, cancer or trying to understand something related to psychopathology. And it's not very different for me. It's trying to think both of the way, if we gain enough understanding of the actual neural circuitry, for example, that drives prosocial behavior, first of all, we can understand what happens when these things go wrong. For example, in psychopathologies that are related to deficits in empathy, like autism spectrum disorder or psychopathy or conduct disorder. But we can also gain insight into how we can really develop better and more effective strategies to influence or to enhance things like compassion for outgroup members by, instead of trying to cognitively intervene and convince ourselves to feel more compassion, we can if we understand what motivates us on a biological level, we can then be more effective in finding new solutions to these very ancient problems that we're facing.
Yeah. You know what's weird is that, as I think I was going to joke with you and say, like, maybe you could teach governments of the world to be, pro-social and more compassionate, because they always seem to rule by decree. You're going to do this, or we're going to punish you. So if that's, I mean, again, this is just my opinion, but that seems to be the default of governments around the world, especially the last few years. You're going to do this or else. So why again, this is my opinion, but it seems like a lot of governments are like that. Do you think so? And why, if so, why are governments essentially antisocial or, ruling by decree instead of ruling by being nice to people somehow?
It's quite a painful question for me because, as you may know, Israel has quite turbulent politics, and we just had elections, and pretty right-wing government has been elected. And so part of that you're saying kind of mirrors this global trend for reflecting some kind of societal urge, more constraining social structures. But, I really think that there's an ongoing sort of debate, if you will, amongst psychologists and philosophers. When you're looking at global trends, is the world becoming less empathic? We have this sort of intuition that it is becoming less empathic, but that's not necessarily completely true. That there is a group of thinkers that are actually saying the opposite might be happening. We might actually be living in very empathic times, but we're just more exposed to everything that happens everywhere, and we have this very strong bias. We hear about all the negative and antisocial things that happen, so we feel like we're living in a less empathic time. But if you think about historical events and of human history, that's not necessarily the case. But I don't really know, and I do think humans are super complicated. So if I'll explain to you a little bit about rats, and we can simplify this very complicated problem, if you will.
Yeah, my daughter, just
yes.
A quick note just for listeners, in case they don't know. I mean, maybe I'm stupid because I didn't know this, but my daughter had mice and rats, and I saw there was a huge difference that the rats seemed to be a lot more intelligent and a lot less skittish and curious than the mice. So I think they may be very good subjects for you to study because of that. They seem to be like, the ones we had were like really well trained, and again, they just seem to be very curious and interesting and smart.
I adore these rats that I work with, and I think they are really wonderful pets as well, for sure. They are very smart and they're very social, and they have individual personalities for sure. And they are capable of learning all kinds of different situations, and that allows us to examine what they would do under different circumstances in a way that mice really just won't do. Although I will say that in the last couple of years, there have been a couple of research groups that have worked on developing these pro-social paradigms similar to what I had developed with mice, and are becoming more successful at it. So there is a hope for mice as well, after all.
Intelligent Threads produces results within seconds of wear, tested over the past 7 years for maximum effectiveness and quality of life improvements. Think about an 80% better REM and deep sleep per night. This revolutionary technology is the game changer everyone needs. Go to intelligentthreads.com today.
How do you look at empathy, something like empathy in a rat, right? So let me for a second just define what I'm thinking of when I say the word empathy and prosocial behavior, because there are a lot of different definitions and concepts like empathy, sympathy, compassion, emotional contagion, all these different types of concepts that tend to get intertwined semantically when we're thinking about it. And it's really important, especially since we are going to talk about rats and not about humans, to try to conceptualize empathy in a way that allows us to investigate it in animals, non-human animals. And so when I think about empathy, I think about it very intuitively as our tendency to be able to understand and reflect the emotional states of others. But it's not only that. I think when we say empathy, we're also assuming some kind of a motivational state that is a pro-social motivational state, which basically means that there is some component of caring, basically, about the outcome of the other individual who happens to be in distress. And being pro-social just means that you're willing to act for that benefit, that other individual.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you. X number of years ago, I don't remember how long, but there was a study on rat mothers that, the ones that licked and groomed their pups a lot more. Mm-hmm. The pups grew up to be a lot more, they were more sociable. They weren't as anxious, mm-hmm. etc. Do you have to put that into your calculations? Like, a situation where a rat would normally be pro-social, if it was mm-hmm. raised by a bad mother that didn't lick it and mm-hmm. care for it very much, does that kind of undo its behavior or alter it radically?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating bunch of studies by Michael Meany's group that showed the epigenetic basis of these type of effects. So when the mothers lick and groom their pups, they actually cause long-term changes in stress system by changing the amounts of receptors in the brain that are sensitive to stress transmission in the brain, to put it simply. And so these pups, when they grew up, they appeared to be less anxious and more bold. And of course, when you are more bold, you are more successful, you're more resilient, and these animals were basically thriving more. And we definitely think about these things, and part of my research focuses on the effect of early life stress and trauma in the rats. And in this case, I'm talking about maternal separation, which kind of speaks to what you're referring to, and trying to understand how the adult behavior, the social adult behavior changes in these animals who are exposed to early life stress. And not only that, what we're really interested in understanding is not only these behavioral changes, but the biological, the neurobiology that underlies these long-term changes. So that is part of what I'm studying in the lab. But let me take one step back, if that's okay, and explain
Sure.
what we know, what happens in your brain when you see somebody, for instance, cutting their fingers with a knife. I mean, even when I say that, you might feel some kind of aversive response, right? Because we have aversion to others naturally. And what studies with human subjects that did neuroimaging and observed activity in subjects' brain when they were observing others in pain or distress from 10 or 20 years ago at this point, found a really fascinating discovery that we actually activate the very same neural network when we ourselves experience pain and distress and when we see someone else experiencing pain and distress. And this shared neural activity reflects mostly the emotional, the affective component of pain, or that the aversive response that we have to pain. So in that way, in this kind of dispersed network in your brain that includes areas in the frontal cortex and areas that are more in the midbrain or more in the limbic system that are not requiring things like complex cognitive function, are actually highly conserved across mammalian species. And this system is understood to be the way that we process the stress of others, and that we also feel this response that we think of as an empathic response to their distress.
Are there personality archetypes that respond to, other people being hurt in a predictable way? Like for instance, I hate horror movies. I don't want to see them ever again because I feel like life is bad enough. I don't want to be, see terrible things. But like my son loves them. He's not, I guess, damaged like I am emotionally, and he's okay to see them. But again, are there archetypes? Like you said, the rats have personalities. Again, are there different archetypes that lead to different levels of pro or antisocial behavior in people or in rats?
For sure. I mean, I think that we all kind of know that from our life experience that some people have higher sensitivity to others' pain. It's not exactly clear at this point what's special about people who are more sensitive or less sensitive. There's really fascinating study, people who are really on the extreme ends of the spectrum of empathic responsiveness. So one extreme is, and this is Abigail Marsh's research, and on the one hand, she looked at psychopathy. She looked at what happens when psychopaths see others in pain or fear. And she also looked on the other end of the spectrum at these super altruists, people who are, so altruistic that they do extraordinary things above and beyond average. For example, jump into the train rails to save a stranger who is fallen in. Her group of subjects that she looked at scientifically was people who donate kidney anonymously to an anonymous recipient. And this is often something that people do. I mean, it's almost pathological in a way, because it's something that they often do even against their family's wishes, or, they just feel really compelled to help someone who they don't even know, and they're not going to get any sensible reward for this behavior. And she found a common thread to both of these extremes, which was dysregulation of a certain area in the brain that's called amygdala. And this region of the brain is associated specifically with processing fear and very salient emotions or salient things in the world that we should pay our attention to. And specifically, she found that in psychopathy, there tends to be less activity in this area in response to other people's fear, whereas in super altruist, there is actually hypersensitivity in the amygdala to other people's fear. So that gives us a little inkling or a clue of how these things could be modulated by the brain.
What about self-awareness? Like, some people are what's called hypervigilant. Are those people more likely to be hypervigilant about others than they are about themselves, or the people are very self-conscious?
Yes, there are indications actually that people who are they tend to be more anxious or more fearful also tend to be more sensitive, show more empathy to other people's pain and distress. And so that might be because it might be related to the fact that we're probably using the very same system, right, to process our own distress and others' distress. So if your neural system is very responsive to distress, then it would respond both to yours and to other people's distress. Like, someone said to me once, never go to a dentist who tells you that he doesn't mind going to the dentist because it never hurts him, right? You kind of want to feel like the person in front of you has their own experience to be able to put themselves in your shoes and identify with what you might be feeling.
Well, speaking of dentists, you might want to see the old movie Little Shop of Horrors.
I do know that movie.
Oh yeah, the crazy dentist that liked to hurt people. It was the opposite.
Right. Of course. But let's focus on our positive rat, who, I should caveat this next couple of sentences by saying that rats, we have actually revealed or kind of helped others see this very positive pro-social behavior that the rats do for others. But of course, rats, like humans, can respond either pro-socially or anti-socially. They can be aggressive, just like we can be. And both of these behaviors can be adaptive depending on the context and who's standing in front of you and what the situation is. So in a couple of words, the basic finding is that when a rat observes a cage mate that is trapped in a little jail-like tube, in a plastic tube, it's not a painful situation. It's considered a mild psychological stress. The rats don't really like to be trapped, but they're not in pain. They're not in any extreme suffering. They just would prefer to get out. And free rat that is on the outside of the trap, extremely bothered by the fact that the cage mate is trapped. And they show this by circling constantly around the restrainer containing the trapped rat and trying basically to reach the trapped rat by kind of biting at the restrainer or clawing or digging under it. And this trap has a door that can only be opened from the outside by the free rat. And this test, the rats experience the situation for 1 hour every day for a couple of weeks. And at the beginning, they don't really know what to do. They don't know that they can open the door. They don't know that the door is a door. And then at some point, they discover that they can knock the door over by flipping it over the side with their snout. And when they do that, the trapped rat is released. And once they figure that out, they repeat that behavior on the subsequent sessions very quickly, within a couple of minutes of being placed in the test arena. And we found that most rats that are tested with a trapped cage mate will learn to do this task and open the door and release the cage mate. And they don't do that for a bunch of other conditions, like if there's a toy in the restrainer or if the restrainer is empty. So it's really driven by the trapped cage mate. And why am I saying that this is motivated by a rat-like, empathy-like experience? We looked a lot at the different factors that motivate this behavior. And what we found was, first of all, that the rats are distressed. We see an increase in stress hormones, not only in the trapped rat, but also in the observer, in the free rat. And this response goes away once these rats learn how to open the door and release the trapped rat. And even more interesting is that if you block the transfer of the stress between the two rats by giving them anxiolytic, the anxiety medication, a very common one that people often use, midazolam, then they actually don't help nearly as much, whether the free rat is not feeling the stress or the trapped rat is not feeling the stress. And
what about, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
The final, there's a couple of interesting pieces to this puzzle, is that rats, of course, rats like us, they really like to be together and play together. So they might be motivated by the social reward that you feel when you get to hang out with the previously trapped rat, and now the free rat can maybe play or interact with the trapped rats. But we have discovered that even if they are not allowed to interact at all after the release of the trapped rats, so if the trapped rat is released onto a separate space and they can't interact at all, this behavior is still demonstrated. And that finding, which was really important because a lot of people that was the main criticism against this paradigm. This was also shown by several other research groups at this point using very similar paradigms. The rats are doing this behavior even if they don't get as the social reward of interacting with the released rat afterwards.
Okay. What about if you put them in a situation where you need two rats to, get through a maze? It's like, this is probably thinking of like how the movies, but if one rat has to stand on a platform and at the same time another rat has to stand on another platform in order to open a door. It's kind of crazy.
That
but is there a
very
situation like that? Would that work?
Well,
where they have to cooperate to get a result?
There are quite a lot of studies looking at cooperation in rats, specifically not something as cognitively complex as, it's not an escape room where they can learn how to, I don't know if anybody's tried that actually, Richard, that if you'd like to come to my lab for a couple of years, I think we could work on that. But it's been really interesting to see that rats will collaborate. They will reciprocate, for instance, for food rewards. So they will pass a food reward to another rat if they will themselves get a food reward in return. And not rats, but other species such as wolves or elephants do learn to cooperate by pulling a rope simultaneously to get a tray of food closer to them within reach. And interestingly enough, rats actually really love to synchronize their behavior. So you mentioned maze running, and rats really, there is research showing that they prefer to synchronize maze running, even when they don't get any particular reward for doing so. So there are a lot of, this field of animal behavior and social behavior has really expanded in the last couple of decades, thanks to a lot of brave work by some scientists, because even when I first published this paradigm, it was still quite taboo to discuss these types of behaviors in non-humans. And now it's become much more acceptable to the point that even, the biggest labs and, top tier universities are publishing routinely data that comes out of these types of paradigms that's really helping to push forward the way that we understand social behavior.
Yeah, would this lead to like social engineering where, if you discover what makes rats more cooperative, that, things like that may be tried with people, or would that be manipulative in a bad way?
So let me give you an example from the rats and how I think that this could be applicable to humans. Okay. So we find in the rats that, like humans, they show a really strong in-group bias, which means that we as humans and a lot of other species as well, we show empathy and prosocial behavior, but we tend to do that specifically towards, first of all, obviously, if you think about your kin or your close familiar group of friends, but even more broad than that, a lot of social species show these types of behaviors towards the group of animals that they live in, even strangers that are part of that group. And we as humans in particular, are very, very good at this because we have to make a lot of social decisions very quickly based on very few situational cues. So, something like just a blue ribbon or a red ribbon can change people's neural activity in response to a face if they were just told 20 minutes ago that they are blue, So we have a very, very powerful capacity to change our whole social approach to someone based on this group formation. And we found that the rats are similar, and they will help strangers from their own group, which in this case is the same strain as them. these white albino rats that we use are Sprague dollies, but they don't release trapped strangers from this unfamiliar Long Evans strain that has this like black hooded cape on the of fur on their fronts. And why am I saying that this is an in-group out-group effect is that we also found that this behavior can be totally flexible depending on the rat's social experience. So if they actually, it's enough for them to live with one rat from the out group, from the other strain for 2 weeks. And they show not only do they start releasing their cage mates from that other strain, they also expand that prosocial motivation and they will help strangers from the unfamiliar strain that before they were not interested in helping.
But once they get to know the other species of rats by hanging out with one of them, then they're more compassionate to all members of that species?
Exactly. They expand their prosocial motivation. And we don't know if this is due to, for example, reduced threat arousal in response to this stranger, or if it's more sensitivity to the distress signal that now they are more attuned to now that they are familiar with this strain. But whatever the reason is, they actually totally shift their behavior. And so what that showed us, combined with this other study that we did when we cross-fostered rats at birth with a litter of a black caped strain, the Long Evans strain, and we saw that cross-fostering also caused these Sprague dolly rats who never had any experience with their own strain, and they grew up like Mowgli in the jungle. They grew up and only knew these Long Evans rats. And when they had an opportunity to help a stranger from their own strain as an adult, they didn't do it at all. They only helped their adoptive strain. So these two experiments combined, this cohabitation with the other rat as an adult for 2 weeks, and this cross-fostering study that caused these rats not to help their own strain, showed us that their prosocial motivation or their empathic responses are determined by their social experience and not biologically determined.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was wondering, if you have two male rats, let's say that, want to be with one of the females, and if they would normally fight, is there a way to get them to work together, even though when they would normally be rivals? Maybe this will work better in monkeys. I don't know, but I don't know if this happens in rats.
That's a great question. I have no answer for that. I am interested in doing the opposite, which is to create a situation where these in-group members become competitors over some kind of resource and see whether that changes their prosocial motivation. But for example, you could think of, actually there is really cool studies. Jeff Mogul's lab, who was one of the pioneers of showing that rodents, have this transfer of distress between them. He showed that mice who were looking at other mice in pain showed increased sensitivity to pain themselves. It's called hyperalgesia. They showed increased sensitivity to pain, but only if the other mouse in pain was familiar to them and not if he was a stranger mouse. And they did a really cute study with humans, and they showed that you could basically get humans to act like friends in terms of their pain sensitivity modulation by getting them to play Guitar Hero together for half an hour. So these human subjects would come to the lab and they would put their hands in a bucket of ice. Do you know what happens when you put your hand in a bucket of ice?
After about 5 seconds, it's really unpleasant.
Yes, it becomes quite painful, and you pull your hand out, and we can measure your pain threshold, like how quickly did you pull your hand out. And what they showed is that when you're doing this experiment with a friend alongside you, just like with the mice, you are more sensitive to pain. When you see your friend in pain, you pull your hand out faster. But if the guy next to you is a stranger, you actually pull out your hand out slower than you would if you were by yourself. So when there's a stranger around, you are less sensitive to pain than you are when you're by yourself. And so
is it a sensitivity or is it social conditioning? if you have a friend that you trust them and you trust their responses more than a stranger. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, that's a good alternative explanation. That could theoretically, on some level be possible for mice as well. But when you think about it's more of a biological mechanism that mediates it. So they show that it's dependent on the stress network, on activation of glucocorticoid receptors, and you can block this effect by blocking the stress system, the HPA axis. So it might be related to, but you have to think, what does it mean you're trusting your friend? It means that if you are in a safety mode, sort of, your whole physiology changes, right? Your vagal tone of your vagus nerve changes. Like, there's a lot of changes that could influence your receptors' responses to things like external stimuli. So these are not necessarily contradicting explanations. But so then the punchline is that, when they got these strangers to play Guitar Hero for half an hour, after that, they showed the same increased sensitivity to pain as, the friends did, which is super cool. And I think that goes back to your idea of doing that with the rats. You could probably get the rats to become friends by getting them, to like run a wheel together or something like that. So,
yeah, or eat a meal together or something.
Share a meal. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I remember when I was little, I had hamsters. I know they're a different creature, but sometimes I'd give them like a whole corn
on the jerks.
Well, but I would give them a whole corn on the cob, and they would line up around the corn on the cob like a family, and they would eat it to nothing. Like literally, they would eat every bit, but they would all hang out and eat from the same corn carcass, you could say. So I wonder if that would engender pro-social behavior in rats.
Yeah, you have very good intuitions. I know that some people are working on similar things. So definitely eating together is a really good way to get people to, this is basically what we have parties for, right? So are you curious to hear what happens in the brains of these rats?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have asked you that, but my brain kept giving silly examples. But go ahead, please. Yes.
I know. So it's such a fascinating behavior and such a complex behavior that we could definitely spend a lot of time talking about that. But the brain as well is extremely fascinating. And so what we do is that we look at the brain-wide activity of these rats after they are in the situation, either in a pro-social situation or a non-pro-social situation. So for instance, we can look at rats there with a trapped in-group member or an out-group member, and afterwards we can ask what parts of their brain were active when they were doing this task. And we can contrast between these conditions and try to dissociate the neural circuitry that is specifically involved in pro-social motivation. And when we do that, what we see is really, it's fascinating on so many levels. First, we see a really similar network in the rats, as has been widely documented in the human literature for empathy. The very same regions are active in rats when they observe trapped conspecific. So this like affective empathy network that we see in humans. Interestingly, what we see in the rats is that this network is active regardless of whether these rats decide eventually to help the trapped rat or not. So this was really counterintuitive for me because I expected to find activity in this empathy network only for the in-group members, and that it would be predictive of helping behavior. And that was not really the case. And so what that showed to me, and the way I interpret this, is that this network that we think of as an empathy network is actually the way that the brain processes the fact that someone in the vicinity is in distress. And it doesn't really speak to the willingness of that animal to actually act for the benefit of the trapped animal or act in a pro-social way. But there is a network that is only activated in a pro-social context. And we only see that network active in the helper rat, in the in-group condition. And that network...
Quick question. What happens when, you mentioned the rat was in a trap and the other rat figured out how to get it out with the trap door. At the moment that the other rat comes out, what changes in the brain of the helper rat? Do they get like a surge of oxytocin when the rat comes out and they go, "Oh, thank you"? Or again, like you mentioned earlier on,
yeah.
when, so part of the brain's active already when they first see the trapped rat, but how does that signal change? Like in the beginning, how long does it take the brain to assess the situation and then act? And what changes when it acts? And then again, what changes when the rat gets freed?
Right. So what we are seeing is that the brain's reward system is involved in this. The reward system is this dopaminergic network in the brain that is what helps you to do things that are actually, good for your survival, that makes chocolate taste good, and things like gaining money can activate the system, or doing anything that feels good, basically. But we think of this network more generally as a motivational network, because it can also be activated when you're trying to avoid something aversive. It's not only activated when you're feeling good, but it's a very strong mechanism that drives us to approach something or even to avoid something sometimes. And we see this dopaminergic network activated only in the helping in the empathy conditions, in the empathy rats. And interestingly, we also see, we've looked, for example, at one part of the brain that's called the nucleus accumbens. That's kind of a central hub of the reward system. And we see specifically in this area, we see that there's a spike in activity when the door to the trap falls open. So at some point, the rats do realize that the door itself, they find the actual door opening itself rewarding at some point. But we don't see any activity in this reward network when the trapped rat is an outgroup member. What we're thinking basically is that, and regarding your question about oxytocin, definitely involved. I haven't shown specifically the way that oxytocin is involved in this response, but other researchers have shown that it plays a role in this kind of helping behavior in the rat, and that definitely makes sense. But it's probably a more complicated interaction between something like oxytocin, dopamine, and even serotonin, all these neurotransmitters that lead to such a complex type of behavioral response. And we are investigating these interactions. And this research still needs to be developed more so that we can really understand the way that different pathways in the brain are recruited for these different conditions. But just the final point is that I think that a really important takeaway from this, there is another region that's called the orbitofrontal cortex. And this region is really important for assessing the reward value of things for the self. And it's also activated along the reward system, specifically in these helping conditions. And what that shows me is that at least for the rats, there are actually some parallels from the human research, but at least for the rats, what we can see is that it's not the amount of activity in the empathy network in the brain that is important, or the amount of suffering that they so-called process, but it is how much they value the outcome of that specific, the specific animal that is trapped. And if there is a high value for the outcome for that animal, then they show activation in this motivational network, and they are motivated to approach and help. So the question should be not how we emphasize the suffering of the other that's in distress, but rather how do we enhance this feeling of the value of the other's outcome, or this common group identity that seems to drive this value naturally. And when we think about how that could be happening in the brain, we think about the way that the brain processes things like social identity information and social category information, and how these responses can modulate this whole cascade of emotional and motivational responses to someone in distress. That's what we're currently investigating in the lab.
Okay. One last experiment I thought of is, what if you have a male on the outside and, inside the trap is like a female in heat versus a male on the outside and the female is not in heat? Have you tried that to see if there's like a change in the prosocial behavior? Because it's altruistic at that point, but it's still also self-serving. The male would hope to mate with the female, especially if she's in heat. So maybe that would change the behavior a lot.
Sure. I totally imagine that, I've never tried this, but I totally imagine that they would learn to open the door faster. Say there was something even more desirable inside, and that doesn't have to be female in heat. It can also be a non-social object. Like if an animal, is very hungry and there's food inside, then it would learn to open the restrainer faster probably. Or if an animal is trapped and the door is turned around so that it can be opened from the inside, then animals learn very fast how to open the door. But this doesn't subtract from the value of learning to open the door for a same strain, same sex, same age, conspecific and non-related stranger that I think is, the more maybe was a little baffling finding for some researchers when we first demonstrated that this was happening. But I did try something like what you're saying once in a pilot study that I never published. I tried to see whether a male rat, would release a female to a separate arena where his cage mate was waiting. Okay. So would he be so altruistic as not to get the female himself, but to release her to the custody of his cage mate? And, I did not see much helping in that context, I have to say. So rats have a limit. They have their cost benefit analysis as well. We also found, for instance, that they...
Right, but it shows you they can do it though, which is a pretty advanced thing to do.
Like they will not cross like a pool of oil to release a trapped cage mate, but they will cross a pool of water. So we know that we can quantify how much they will sort of, how much effort they will exert for helping a trapped cage mate.
Okay. Well, very good. Ivan, what's the best way for people to find out more about your experiments? Where can they go to see what you're doing?
Well, we have a website for the lab. All of our publications are listed on there, and little blurbs about what we're saying, and some links to recent articles. There was the National Geographic piece about animal minds that just came out in October, and we are featured there. So there's a lot of links on the website.
Okay, well, very good. Yeah, and I did see an article, and that's where I found you. Just so you know.
Awesome.
There's a bunch of researchers in the article on animal minds. So I thought it was very interesting what was in there, and I wanted to ask you more. So thank you for coming on the podcast. Again, so late at night, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure discussing with you. I really enjoyed hearing all of your experiment ideas.
Intelligent Threads is like no other product on the market. True next-level biotechnology to help fix root cause issues associated with your body's structure. Try a patch, last for 7 days, and see for yourself. IntelligentThreads.com. For one or more discussions on Intelligent Threads, please listen to the podcast called It's a Body Structure Thing on Spotify and YouTube. Visit IntelligentThreads.com today.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.